tons more news today, including more about all the FSR 3 details, the new GPUs, all of that. But one thing that happened at Gamescom, which I think is relevant to previous videos I've done on the channel, but I think has gotten buried under the new GPU announcements and all of that, is AMD did get asked again about whether they are blocking DLSS in Starfield, and they actually had more of a response this time than just saying no comment. So anyway, so this article from The Verge says that AMD claims there's nothing stopping Starfield from adding Nvidia DLSS, but they did reach out to the Starfield developer Bethesda and they didn't respond to the DLSS questions. Now, I think we have to be careful here, because this headline does not seem like a direct quote, because I never saw, I think AMD actually directly quoted in this article as saying exactly the nothing stopping wording, which can be important when it gets down to lawyers and PR details and all of that. So anyway, let's get down to the actual direct quotes we find in the article. So apparently Azor says that he can't, Azor being Frank Azor, the representative of AMD being asked here, says he can't say what the contract includes. Instead, he repeatedly lands on this. So here's things in direct quotes. If they want to do DLSS, they have AMD's full support. Which isn't quite the same thing as saying there's nothing stopping them, but it is a pretty strong statement. If they want to do DLSS, they have AMD's full support. However, it doesn't specifically say if that was the case a few weeks ago, or was that a month or so ago now? I don't even remember, when this all blew up. So has something changed since then when they were saying no comment, and maybe now, they're commenting because maybe things have changed behind the scenes? I don't know, but either way, it will be nice if AMD was blocking things, if they've maybe learned their lesson. However, other direct quotes we're getting here, let's hear all that he has to say. So we want to be very careful not to put this answer onto our partners. Now, in other words, they don't want to throw Bethesda under the bus if they're choosing not to include it when they could. However, that kind of feels like what they're doing here when they say if they want to do DLSS, they have AMD's full support. But anyway, let's keep moving. So then they do say that when we do bundles, we ask them, are you willing to prioritize FSR? And says money absolutely exchanges hands. Now that's specific to when they do GPU bundle deals. So many of you are aware, and I've reported on my channel a ton, that right now, if you buy many of AMD's CPUs and GPUs, you can get a free copy of Starfield. Now I say free, obviously, that has to get subsidized somewhere, but they're not charging more than the MSRP of the GPU to throw that in, right? So you get a copy of Starfield with a purchase of AMD products. So, they did have to hand money to Bethesda in order for that to take place, right? So they are saying when they do a GPU bundle deal, money absolutely changes hands. And when they do those bundles, we do ask them, are you willing to prioritize FSR? So there is here's some cash, please prioritize FSR. But again, they are saying as a follow-up, if they ask us for DLSS support, we always tell them yes. So this is a request rather than a demand. That's not a direct quote. The direct quote is, if they ask us for DLSS support, we always tell them yes. So for example, when all of this originally blew up, people pointed out, well, some AMD bundled games and partnered games do offer DLSS support, but many of those games were published by Sony. They're PlayStation 5 exclusives on console that made their way to PC and did have a partnership with AMD, but did also offer DLSS support. So it's possible that a large organization like Sony was able to push back or wanted to push back more against that exclusivity and did, get to include DLSS support. So there's some evidence that this is the case, that they were, at least in some cases, you were able to, developers were able to push back, publishers were able to push back a little bit there, and not exclusively do it. Now, Azor does go on to say that Bethesda's decision, and they are saying this is Bethesda's decision, to use FSR is console leverage, he explains, or at least that is why they might have wanted to prioritize FSR. Anyway, so that's interesting. Another direct quote we get here is, if and when Bethesda wants to put DLSS into the game, they have our full support. And Bethesda apparently didn't reply about whether they will add DLSS to the game. Now, again, I don't see anything here that specifically says that this wasn't more of a requirement in the past and maybe something has now changed since the public pushback, or maybe it hasn't. Maybe this has been the case all along, and maybe there are complications due to the contractual, the non-discussion of contractual deals that maybe made it take a while for AMD to be able to respond to this. Maybe there had to be lawyer talks between companies. I don't know. But this was such a big story a while back, and that this is the first actual quotes from AMD that we have, and I'll let you guys make of it exactly what you will. But we do know that Starfield will have FSR 2 support at launch. So again, this is another thing, is there were many, many rumors blowing up that this whole big partnership with Starfield meant that Starfield would likely be the first game with FSR 3. However, in this article, we do have Starfield will have FSR 2, AMD confirms. So it's looking like Starfield will not be our big FSR 3 launch. If it does, that's a surprise, because this is saying AMD confirmed FSR 2 for Starfield at launch, and it was not listed as one of the games that AMD has been talking about for FSR 3, nor do I think Bethesda was listed on their list of developers that they gave for developers that have partnered for FSR 3. On a related note, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, which is another AMD-sponsored title, does list both FSR and DLSS supported, despite having the AMD deal. Now, whether this was going to be the case before the public backlash, I have no idea. But really, my thought on this all along has been, you know, if AMD was doing any kind of this exclusivity, it would be nice if they got enough public pushback that they changed their policy. So whether this was the policy or wasn't, I think this is now at least hopefully making it so that these become more open, because any kind of whatever they thought they were gaining, if they did think they were gaining something by making those exclusive, I don't think was worth the public backlash they were getting against that kind of exclusivity. Now, what are we looking at here? So let's talk a little bit about the 7700 XT and the 7800 XT and their pricing. I already did a video about these GPUs and their specs. However, I did it based on information that leaked before the announcement and did not have pricing included yet. So let's talk a bit about pricing, because check this out. Why am I pulling up this slide? This slide actually has fewer games on it than most of the other slides for their performance numbers, and I've already talked about a lot of those other slides in my other videos. Why did I do this one? This slide shows both the 7700 XT and the 7800 XT in the same games running the same tests. I actually don't care so much about the 5700 XT and the 2070 Super on here. I care mostly about that. The reason is I added in a little bit of my own scratch work here. This is showing that it's a 20 to 24% performance uplift to go to the 7800 XT over the 7700 XT. And that is very relevant. Because while the number of compute units is only about a 10% difference, it's 54 versus 60, the memory structure of the whole thing, you know, increased memory bandwidth, all of that, is, I think, more like it's 75% of the total when you're looking at the 7700 XT versus the 7800 XT. And that's looking closer to the actual performance gap that we're seeing here between these GPUs. That's very relevant because of the pricing of these cards right here. At $449 versus $499, it's about 11% more money, $50 more, 11% more money to buy the to buy the 7800 XT over the 7700 XT. So it's looking like, according to AMD's own information they've publicly released, which again is not the same thing as third-party testing, and perhaps these are weirdly performing titles or something like that, who knows, but this actually does look pretty reasonable based on the specs that we've seen, again, because of the cut-down memory system. It's looking like going from the 7700 XT to the 7800 XT is going to be 11% more money for 20 to 25% more performance, and going from 12 gigabytes of VRAM to 16 gigabytes of VRAM. This is making it look like the 7800 XT is going to be the far better performance per dollar GPU, which I think makes it feel like the 7700 XT is mispriced. Imagine if we had the 7700 XT at $399. If this was $399 and $499, imagine that against the 4060 Ti, especially the 8 gigabyte model. If you had the 7700 XT coming in at the same price as the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti, offering significantly more performance and 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which performs much better at ultra settings in the latest games, than 8 gigabytes of VRAM does. If you look at my testing of the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti versus the 16 gigabyte version, you can see that at the maximum settings in the latest games, there are many examples of 8 gigabytes not being enough. Again, I think AMD could have had a knockout deal with the 7700 XT at $399. At $449, I still think compared to the Nvidia competition, we need to get some independent testing, but it might make sense against Nvidia. But it might not make sense against AMD's own 7800 XT. So this feels weird, and that's the main thing I have to say about the pricing there, is that feels weird. One of them offering seemingly significantly better performance per dollar and more VRAM than the other one. Also, how is that going to stack up against the current market? So this is Tech Power Up's relative performance chart, and I'm just getting in here because it's feeling like these GPUs are going to be performing a lot like the 6900 XT and the 6800 from like a performance difference gap. If that sort of makes sense. We're looking at that 22% performance jump, and it's looking like it might be right about there because AMD's claims, again, these are first-party numbers from AMD, so you have to take them with a grain of salt, but AMD's claimed performance uplift over the 4070 did seem to put it, maybe in 6800 XT to 6900 XT performance range, but again, those are AMD's numbers. It's going to be a little difficult to tell for sure. But in other words, putting it right around a 6900 XT rasterized performance numbers doesn't seem completely unreasonable from the information that AMD has released publicly. Which then means that the 7700 XT, if we look at this type of performance difference like I'm looking at here, seems like a interesting comparison point for this, this RX 6800. Now, the RX 6800 has 16 gigabytes of VRAM versus the 12 that we're going to be seeing on the 7700 XT, so it does actually have that advantage. And if we look at current GPU pricing, the 6800 non-XT can currently be had around $430. So it's actually going to be very interesting whether or not it would make more sense, as long as these $430 6800 non-XTs are still available, to buy the 16 gigabyte older card versus the 12 gigabyte newer card. We'll have to see how that plays out. It's going to be an interesting comparison point. And again, if the 7700 XT had been targeted at $399, it would have undercut the 6800 for probably similar performance numbers, albeit a little less VRAM, but it will have the newer AV1 encoder. And we have seen FSR 3 likely offering, for sure offering some exclusive, it's not necessarily FSR 3, but there's a new anti-lag plus, which can help cut down latency, that is seemingly exclusive to the 7000 series. And there seems to possibly be some exclusivity to the driver level frame generation as well. We'll need to see how all of that plays out. So there could still be some exclusivity reasons why the 7000 series would make more sense. But again, I have a feeling that the 7700 XT on the actual retail market over the next few months might drift closer to the $399 mark. And I think if AMD would just launch it at that price, it would be an absolute knockout blow. Now, maybe we'll get the actual third-party reviews out and maybe it'll all make sense anyway. But again, I feel like that $50 10% price gap seems like a bit too much. Now, also, it looks like AMD has confirmed that this is it for the 7000 series. We get the 7900 XTX, the 7900 XT, the 7800 XT, the 7700 XT, and the RX 7600. We also have the weird 7900 GRE. That's a Chinese exclusive on the DIY market, although does make it worldwide, in system integrated builds. Anyway, so this is looking like it. Here's the direct quote. So the quote from the host of this interview specifically said, "You have launched 7700 XT and 7800 XT. Is that going to complete the RDNA 3 portfolio, or is there maybe more on the horizon?" The reply from Scott Herkelman, who is the head of the AMD's Radeon division, says, "Well, the RDNA 3 portfolio is now complete. Of all products that we have planned to launch, that is, this is the last few products that we will launch. We may have some different versions, but they are not a new ASIC. It's been a journey. It's been about a year since we launched the very first RDNA 3, and now we are a year later finishing up the series. We should be done, we are done, and we are excited. And now I think we have a broad spectrum covered for people who want RDNA 3 up and down the price tag." Okay, so now keep in mind that this does not rule out some sort of refresh coming in the future. Like with the 6000 series, they had the 50 at the end, you have your 6700 XT and your 6750 XT, which had a little bit faster memory, things like that. So this doesn't completely rule that out. He does say we may have some different versions. So again, there doesn't rule out refreshes, but it seems like this will be the main lineup moving forward. There are definitely some price gaps in this lineup. Again, if we're going from about, $280 on the RX 7600 to $450 on the 7700 XT, that's another reason why I feel like a slightly lower price on the 7700 XT would make sense, is there is a large price gap between these two models, and then a small price gap here, and then another large price gap here. So, I don't know, feels a little bit weird, but they are claiming that is it. And, I have a feeling on the actual retail market, AMD does seem a lot more willing to let their prices adjust to market conditions and market demands. So I think these will fall where they need to eventually, but maybe it'll take a few months. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we're done seeing new AMD revisions to GPUs, even on the 6000 series. I've reported in a recent video that there was a rumored RX 6750 GRE, Golden Rabbit Edition, and there was some confusion over what that would be. Apparently, we're getting from a hardware leaker who has leaked things accurately in the past, saying RX 6750 GRE equals an overclocked RX 6700 10GB. Now that's kind of interesting. The RX 6700 10GB did not get a lot of press coverage. It mostly came out to salvage chips that were designed for mining, and it had a lower power target and 10 gigabytes of VRAM versus like the 6700 XT. So that would be interesting. So basically what that would indicate then is that the 6750 GRE, if it comes out, is going to be kind of confusingly named because it would have the same number of compute units, stream processors as the 6700 non-XT, not the 6750 XT, but would have a higher clock speed than the 6700 non-XT. It would have the same 10 gigabytes and then boost the performance. So it would be more of a because there's actually a big gap in performance between the 6700 10GB and the 6700 XT. So this would maybe fill in that gap, and maybe that would, pricing-wise, fit somewhere interestingly into AMD's lineup. I don't know. Interesting stuff, but that's where the rumors are currently sitting on that one. We'll have to see if that actually comes out, or even if it does, if it's a China exclusive. Again, the GRE, Golden Rabbit Edition, based on Chinese calendar, feels like a Chinese exclusive type of product. Anyway, let me do a few more updates about FSR 3. Now, I'm not gonna fully talk about FSR 3 right now. I did an entire 30-something minute video about that, so please take a look at that. What this is designed to do is clarify some of the details I wasn't sure about in that video. One thing I mentioned in that video was I was hopeful that AMD's underlying upscaling, not just their frame interpolation, but their actual baseline, upscaling technology would see some improvements with the jump to the 3 version, but I wasn't sure if that would be the case. It looks like the hardware unboxed video, it looks like Tim was able to ask AMD directly about this, and this is AMD's direct quote. AMD FSR 3 includes the latest version of our temporal upscaling technology, which has been optimized to be fully integrated with the new frame generation technology. However, our main focus with AMD FSR 3 research and development has been on creating high-performance, high-quality frame generation technology that works across a broad range of products. So in other words, have there been any changes under the hood? I mean, yes, but it sounds like mostly to make it integrate well into the frame generation space, not necessarily to improve the underlying temporal upscaling that's going on, which I think is a little bit disappointing, although it does say it's, it is their latest version, and a lot of games haven't actually integrated AMD's FSR 2 at the latest version of it, so perhaps, there will be some image quality gains there. But again, it still looks like this wasn't a major push to have this be more competitive with DLSS's upscaling technology. Also, I had mentioned that it was a little bit confusing what was going on with their anti-lag versus anti-lag plus versus whether the FSR 3 upscaling would have its own latency reduction on its own, just part as the technology itself that other GPUs would use, let's say like if you're running this on an Nvidia or an Intel GPU. So this is from AMD's community blog talking specifically about latency reduction. So one thing they mention is running the game at 60 plus FPS before frame generation is enabled helps mitigate the latency because the game will already feel fairly responsive if you're running it at high enough base frame rate. But then they do say that again, AMD, the RX 7000 series graphics cards can optionally switch on and combine the benefits of the new driver-based AMD Radeon Anti-Lag Plus, which I think will require supported games and all of that. So it's looking like the Anti-Lag Plus, which is different than their older anti-lag technology, is exclusive to the 7000 series, but it's not built into FSR 3. It's a separate driver toggle, which will work well in combination with FSR 3, but it's not just FSR 3. It also says that the older GPUs, including the 6000 series, can use the older anti-lag instead, which works in all games. And then they say that for all gamers using virtually any hardware, so this would include, Intel, Nvidia GPUs, all of that, the built-in latency reduction technology in AMD FSR 3 will provide valuable latency reduction when using frame generation. But they're saying that the in-driver anti-lag and anti-lag plus are a bonus on top of that that will stack, okay? Now, how good the built-in FSR 3 latency reduction is going to be something that will remain to be seen. Another question mark I have is, will enabling FSR 3 on an Nvidia GPU be compatible with using Nvidia's Reflex if the game already offers it? So on an Nvidia GPU, let's say you have a 3070, let's say you wanted to use FSR 3 frame generation, but the game also offered Nvidia Reflex, which would be the case in any game that offers DLSS 3 frame generation, but you couldn't use that on a 30 series, right? Can you turn on Reflex plus AMD's frame generation? That would be interesting, but I haven't yet seen any confirmation one way or the other on that. Anyway, speaking of DLSS and FSR, I did already do a video talking about DLSS 3.5. Now, the main new feature within 3.5 is the ray reconstruction technology, and we're still waiting on that. And that will require integration directly into the game. You can't just drop the Nvidia DLSS 3.5 DLL file into a game with older DLSS support and get the ray reconstruction. However, it is looking like if you drop the 3.5 DLL in, you can get some benefits to the image quality of just the upscaling piece of this. And to be clear, because this still confuses people, the upscaling piece of DLSS 3 and later can be used on any RTX GPU, 20 series, 30 series, and 40 series. It's the frame generation technology that can only be switched on the 40 series. So it's looking like there have been tests running, dropping the new 3.5 DLL into Cyberpunk versus the 3.1.1 DLL, which had been there before. And again, 3.1.1 upscaling was working on 20 and 30 series GPUs. People were still arguing with me about that in the comment section. It's just bad naming scheme. I don't know how well this will come through in my video, but in 3.1.1, the chain link fence here looks a lot worse than it does using the 3.5 DLL. So it's looking like there could be even further improvements to the upscaling technology, not just to ray reconstruction, going on with this 3.5 update, which is nice. However, it has been tried out in Immortals of Aveum and did not solve the ghosting issues with frame generation. However, an older version of the frame generation DLL has been reported as solving the ghosting issues with the targeting reticle that I've reported on in previous videos. Specifically, it's looking like if you use the DLSS 3 specifically 1.07, which you can get from Tech Power-Up's public archive, the ghosting issues in Immortals of Aveum when you enable frame generation apparently get fixed. However, the article here at WCCF Tech, the article's author does say they tried the 3.5 DLL, but it did not improve the ghosting. So maybe there's some pros and cons of the older pre-3.5 updates. We'll have to see. Speaking of Immortals of Aveum, I did a video showing how it performs on modern, on a variety of GPUs, some older and some newer, some more powerful, some more mid-range, and it was very difficult to run. And I saw some people in the comments section saying, might as well just get a PS5 and play the game at 4K 60. So let's clarify for a second. Digital Foundry did test the game on PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and the game runs at an internal resolution of 720p, upscaled to a 4K output using FSR 2.1 Ultra Performance Mode. And I can tell you right now, if you're sitting very close to your screen, you will absolutely notice the upscaling artifacts. FSR 2.1 Ultra Performance upscaling does not look like native 4K resolution. And it's even worse on the Series S, which goes down to an internal resolution as low as 436p, and using much reduced graphic settings compared to the Series X and PS5 settings in a lot of scenes. So it's not looking like Unreal Engine 5 just magically works wonderfully on consoles and is struggling on PCs. It's looking like upscaling a significant amount is required to get good 60 FPS performance, although it is at least nice that they do run in 60 FPS. All right, so in other GPU news, in China, there's the More Threads GPUs, which honestly nobody should really be using as a main gaming GPU, but they're interesting in the sense that it is another competitor trying to enter the space. But one of the biggest issues has been its software support, actually running games and them not breaking. Well, it does look like they have new drivers which now support DX11. And there's a number of new games added to their game support list. Now, obviously, I don't have one of these GPUs and I haven't tested them to see how well they actually run, but it is interesting to see this competitor continuing to improve their driver support. And who knows, maybe, 5 or 10 years down the road, maybe there'll be a more major player that people would pay more attention to, so we're just tracking their development. In other small bits of news, we've seen CapFrameX updated to include the new Intel PresentMon version, which does include the GPU busy metric. I've talked about this more in other videos, so I'm not going to delve too much into it here. This is a metric that's useful for identifying CPU bottlenecks, or at least some kind of system bottleneck other than the GPU being GPU limited. Now, it presents the information differently than Intel's own PresentMon does with its overlay, because it's using RTSS. For CapFrameX uses RTSS plugin to show the overlays and shows it in numbers, but it can generate the graph after the fact once you've run and recorded the benchmark results. Okay, we've also seen Sparkle confirming an ARC A770 Titan graphics card will be the 16 gigabyte version. I'm sorry, you probably hear my kids playing, rolling things on the floor upstairs and stomping around. But anyway, we'll just continue the video. Here we go. So theirs will be a 16 gigabyte version, which is interesting because Intel had discontinued its own 16 gigabyte limited edition version of the card. But again, the partner models can still be 16 gigabyte, and we are going to see that from Sparkle's version of the card. In other GPU cooler news, Yeston RX 7800 and 7700 XT Sakura GPUs will feature a white version and an interesting, more unique design. So if you're looking for that type of design, keep a lookout for that. However, availability of the Yeston GPUs in outside of China can be a little bit difficult. They do generally sell them on Newegg, although they don't always get updated to the latest versions super quickly. We're also seeing ASRock refreshing their Challenger and Phantom gaming designs for the RX 7800 XT and 7700 XT GPUs. Videocards.com has some photos here for you. And then AMD has unveiled an Radeon RX 7900 XTX based on their Avatar Frontiers of Pandora partnership. So you get the design featured specifically for Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. So interesting design on that, and that will certainly be a limited edition GPU. Last bits of news, Nvidia to reportedly triple output of compute GPUs in 2024, up to 2 million H100s. So Nvidia not just doubling down, but tripling down on their AI section of their business, which is absolutely exploding right now. So when we hope that they'll lower their consumer GPU prices for gaming, look at how much money they can make on using their silicon capacity to go towards AI components, and it's questionable if they'll feel a lot of financial pressure to lower their prices. We'll see. Hopefully cards like the 7700 XT and 7800 XT will put some pressure on them. We'll have to see. And again, also kind of in the news, not as PC-centric here, but Sony's $200 handheld portal can stream games from your PS5, and that's it. So I don't know, guys. I just wanted to throw that in there. Are you guys interested in this thing at all? It's hard to find what the use case is for this that you couldn't just do by buying a cheaper little, controller attachment for your phone to just game stream off your PS5 on a device that's more capable for less money. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. Also doesn't feature Bluetooth wireless headphone support. You have to use Sony's exclusive. Anyway, whatever. We'll just end it on that. Video's getting a bit long. And I get back to actually having students in my classroom next week, so we'll see what my video output looks like. I do want to cover, as much stuff as I can, but we'll just have to see what I have time for. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.